Right, so if you thought we'd finally put the Book of Boris Johnson behind us, that political chapter was now done, that he's gone back to writing dross for right-wing hate rags, possibly another rubbish book for far more money than he's worth, that the days of political scandal were now constrained largely to Keir Starmer's lying and Rishi Sunak repeatedly making policy to financially benefit himself and his family, then I'm afraid to say the shambling yeti is back once more, as his political leftovers are still creating scandals. And a whole new one has just been exposed. And no, this has nothing to do with Nadine Dorries having finally done the right thing for once in her life by finally sodding off, though her resignation letter, evisceration of Sunak, is lovely to read in terms of the Tories eating themselves, and we all love to watch that happen, don't we? So this new Boris Johnson scandal then. Now, by new one, obviously Johnson has left Parliament now, as we know, so this must in some way connect back to an issue we're already aware of, and so it is, as we're back to the issue of that loan the BBC chairman Richard Sharp facilitated for Johnson back in 2020. How he approached Canadian businessman Sam Blythe to arrange an £800,000 loan for Johnson, who also happened to be a distant cousin of Blythe's. Well, now it looks like a simple repayment of said loan wasn't all the incentive that ended up being offered, as Blythe, it turns out, 4 weeks later, appeared on a confidential list discovered as a result of Freedom of Information requests, a confidential list of 4 candidates to run the British Council. Now, this is a sweet gig. The British Council exists to promote Britain abroad. It oversees cultural and educational programmes run by this country taking place in other countries. And with an annual pay packet of £250,000 going to the chair of the British Council, you can imagine lots of people would quite like this job. Quite the coincidence then that Blythe cropped up on this list within weeks of lending the former PM said cash. What influence, or being guarantor for it, I should say. What influence could Johnson have had in all of this, though, you might be thinking? Well, the appointment of this post, as you might imagine, given it concerns British interests abroad, is actually made by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, at that time run by the bully Dominic Raab. In fact, the British Council is actually a non-ministerial department within the Foreign Office. And further Freedom of Information requests have revealed who was involved at the Foreign Office in selecting who got this job, or who was being put forward for it. And one notable name that became heavily involved in this process was the then MP for Selby and Ainsty, Nigel Adams. Raab himself was also involved in this process. Now, both of these guys, as we know, were Johnson loyalists, but if anyone could be described as the biggest Johnson fanboy of them all, the sort of politician who'd have a poster of Johnson on his bedroom wall, you'd be hard-pressed to find a bigger example than Nigel Adams. Adams, of course, resigned as the MP for Selby and Ainsty virtually the minute Johnson himself resigned, though the official reason given was that Adams was overlooked for a peerage, and a bit of a Nadine Dorries nod then. Bozo being the bloated hill Adams wished his political career to die on, it would seem. And of course, Labour won the subsequent by-election in Selby and Ainsty several weeks ago now. However, that said, if Adams was involved in this, could he have been a bit nervous after Johnson resigned that any shenanigans going in at the Foreign and Commonwealth Office might have all come out and maybe left him in a big steaming pile of doo-doo? It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Now, being how these stories tend to go, nobody's ever going to admit to being responsible for Sam Blythe's name going into the hat for this gig. The Financial Times reports that his name was agreed between the Foreign Office and Downing Street, and obviously Johnson's connections there, along with Raab and Adams, all very conveniently line up for a golden handshake appointment, it would appear. But Blythe himself, crucially, never formally applied for this job and withdrew his candidacy when he became aware he was being headhunted for it. He didn't want it. So it all just smacks of a completely unnecessary mess that the Tories at the time got themselves involved in a plan to give this guy who had done them a favour, their faction a favour, you can argue, give them a golden handshake, a pat on the back with a cushy, highly paid job, even though he didn't ask for it and didn't want it. Of course, back then, they were, of course, getting away with everything. It was only later that things started to become unravelled for Johnson and co. when the formal investigations into Boris Johnson got going. This was all easily buried at the time, though, as the news agenda in the country were very much focused on the pandemic. Of course, what it does now is give Rishi Sunak, yes, another headache. He must be thinking, for crying out loud, it's my turn to be on the take now. Why am I still cleaning up Johnson's messes? God damn him. But then cleaning up is a bit of a stretch when our weakling Prime Minister has gone into hiding again, as per usual, absolute invertebrate that he is. So, Will there be an investigation into all of this? A political probe, as the papers like to call it, as Labour's Angela Rayner has called for one, not least because the freedom of information requests provided on this story by the Foreign Office have been redacted to within an inch of their lives. We do surely deserve to know more of what was going on, though of course Labour are only calling for this to make some political capital out of it. Johnson's gone. His reputation is right down there with bloodworms and leeches already. It can't get much lower. And Nigel Adams, if implicated, has already skedaddled himself. Dominic Raab is still an MP, but is standing down anyway come the next election. So I suppose the question is it worth it? These things cost taxpayers money. Well, taxpayers, I said that word. No, taxpayers money, no. Cost the public purse money. Let's get it right. This is what the Tories always do, though, isn't it? We expect them to benefit themselves. We expect them to scandalise themselves. We expect their own innate greed and self-absorption to ultimately be their undoing, because the Tories always fall out of power by going down in flames. And if you cast your vote in their direction, then more fool you. If you want parliamentarians to be more honest and straight, then stop voting for the same old politicians and the same old parties that don't change anything and are always on the make themselves. What do you think? Is this worth investigating still when those allegedly implicated have either left politics or are about to? Is there any point as long as people keep voting for this party when it doesn't encourage them to change? Let me know in the comments below and be part of the conversation on this. Thanks for watching. Please like, share and subscribe if you found the video useful. I sincerely hope you did. And if so, you might enjoy this video recommendation here, where Johnson quitting back in June wasn't the end of the story then. So perhaps we shouldn't be surprised his dirty laundry is still coming out now. I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.